Captain Idris Tallow had exactly 3 things to do today, and none of them would end with him enjoying a cold beer. 1. Figure out how to
And diplomatic handshakes, but with a mad scramble to shove every last human into whatever could fly and get the hell out of Dodge. Hence, the refugee fleet, a ragtag bunch of ships that had seen better days, led by the one and only fleet commander Arlen Voss. Voss had all the patience of a caffeinated squirt and the charm of a rusty nail, but damn if he wasn't the last best hope of humanity. All right, folks, we're hanging on with duct tape and stubbornness, and both are running thin, Voss announced, his voice crackling through the comms, barely audible over the cacophony of alarms and panicked chatter. The control room of the flagship, the Dauntless, was a symphony of chaos. Or maybe a cacophony. Whatever it was loud and it wasn't getting any quieter. Commander, we're stuck in a decaying orbit around a star that's about to go supernova. This is not what I'd call a prime vacation spot, grumbled Lieutenant Jessa Rawl. She was the kind of person who could make a spreadsheet sound like a death sentence, which, considering their current situation, was more of a talent than a flaw. Think of it as a free fireworks show, Voss replied, his sardonic grin practically audible through the comlink. And if we don't figure out how to get out of here, we'll have front row seats. The Vareth pursued them with a single-minded determination that was both impressive and utterly terrifying. Rumor had it they didn't even sleep. Probably didn't have Netflix either, which would explain their terrible moods. The humans, on the other hand, had perfected the art of running away while screaming profanities over the last few months. Fuel reserves are at 5%. We've got enough for one big jump if we can find a spot. Any spot. Even a mildly habitable asteroid would do, Rawl noted, her fingers flying over the controls as if they might magically conjure up a solution. Can't wait to settle down and start a farm there, Voss replied dryly. Maybe raise some mutant chickens. The bridge door slid open with a reluctant hiss, admitting Sergeant Vance, the self-appointed morale officer. Vance had a face permanently set on woeful, as if he'd been told his puppy was run over by an ice cream truck every morning. Permission to suggest, sir, that perhaps we consider, alternate options. He ventured, scratching at his beard like it owed him money. If by alternate options you mean surrender, I'd rather do a tap dance naked on a bed of nails, Voss retorted. He knew surrender wasn't an option. The Vareth weren't known for their leniency or love of interpretive dance. Vance shifted his weight, awkward as a giraffe on a skateboard. Well, I was thinking more along the lines of creative solutions. Creative solutions got us into this mess in the first place. Rawl cut in, her tone sharper than Voss's razor. Remember the let's pretend to be asteroids plan, Voss chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Hey, it worked for a solid hour before they figured it out. I'd call that a success. In the midst of their banter, the proximity alarms blared to life, a sound like a banshee on caffeine. What now? Voss muttered, half expecting to find the universe itself flipping them the bird. Vareth ships inbound. And they're not bringing cookies, Rawl reported, her voice tight with the kind of tension that could snap steel cables. Of course they are. Because they've got nothing better to do than chase the last humans into a cosmic barbecue, Voss said, shaking his head. All right, let's see if we can't give them the runaround one more time. The crew scrambled, a flurry of movement and shouted commands. Voss watched his people, a motley collection of survivors, misfits, and fighters, doing the impossible on a daily basis. It was enough to make a grown man cry if he had time for that sort of thing. Commander, I've got something, Rawl called out, eyes glued to the screen. There's a wormhole almost within reach. It's like winning the lottery if the lottery was rigged by your mother-in-law. Voss arched an eyebrow. A wormhole, huh? How convenient. I trust it about as far as I can throw it. Better than nothing, and we've got a whole lot of nothing, Rawl pointed out. If we time it right, we could jump through and leave the Vareth eating our exhaust. Well, I do love a good gamble, Voss said, slapping the armrest of his chair. All right, folks, let's see if we're feeling lucky. The Dauntless shuddered as the engines roared to life, the ship protesting the sudden burst of energy like an old man waking up from a nap. On screen, the wormhole yawned open, a swirling maw of uncertainty and doom, but right now it looked downright inviting. "Here goes nothing," Voss muttered, as the Dauntless surged forward, leading the ragtag fleet in a desperate dash towards the cosmic unknown. The Vareth ships loomed behind them, ominous and merciless, but for once they would have to play catch-up. As the fleet hit the event horizon, everything stretched and twisted, space itself bending in ways that would make a physicist cry tears of joy or frustration, depending on how much they liked their career. And then they were through, ejected into the void like an unwanted guest at a wedding. Silence fell, interrupted only by the beeps and whirs of systems rebooting. "Well, that was a ride," Rawl remarked, her voice tinged with the kind of relief that comes from surviving another day against all odds. "Status reports coming in. Looks like we didn't leave anyone behind. Good. I'd hate to think we lost someone in a wormhole." "Imagine the paperwork," Voss replied, running a hand through his hair. He took a breath, letting the tension bleed out. "Congratulations, Commander," Vance chimed in, his voice warmer than usual. "We're still alive. Don't get too comfortable," Voss warned, though a small smile tugged at his lips. "We've still got the Vareth on our tails, and I doubt they're just going to give up and take up knitting." "Knitting sounds nice," Rawl mused, a rare moment of levity in her voice. "Nice and normal. Normal's overrated," Voss replied. "Besides, this way we've got a hell of a story to tell. Assuming we live long enough to tell it." And with that, they plunged once more into the great unknown, a battered fleet with a spine of steel, and a collective middle finger raised high. The universe was vast, cold, and mostly indifferent, but if humanity had one thing going for it, it was an unyielding refusal to go quietly into the night. "Next stop, who the hell knows," Voss said. "Let's hope it's got good food." As the Dauntless led the fleet onward, the specter of the Vareth loomed just out of sight. The game of cat and mouse continued, but for now, humanity had earned a brief reprieve, a moment of defiant survival against a universe that seemed hell-bent on their extinction. And somewhere, out in the black, the Vareth watched and waited, their cold alien minds calculating the next move. But for now, the humans had slipped through their fingers, leaving only the echo of laughter and the scent of burned-out engines in their wake. The Dauntless shuddered as it adjusted to the new coordinates, systems groaning like an old man getting out of a too-comfy chair. The wormhole had spat them out in a corner of the galaxy as unremarkable as it was unexplored. A vast, empty void stretched before them, promising only more stars and silence. "Cheery place," Lieutenant Jessa Rawl commented, peering at the navigation screen with the enthusiasm of someone examining a tax audit. "Perfect for a nice, slow existential crisis." Commander Arlen Voss nodded, glancing at the readouts himself. They'd emerged relatively unscathed, but that didn't mean they could relax. The Vareth weren't the kind to give up, not now, not ever, and they definitely had a knack for showing up uninvited to ruin the party. "All right, people, keep everything tight and tidy," Voss barked, trying to inject some misplaced optimism into his voice. "We're not out of the woods yet, assuming there are any woods left." The comms crackled with reports from the rest of the fleet, each ship in varying states of disrepair and panic, much like Voss's patience. "Commander," Rawl said, turning with that look she got when she had bad news. Which, in their situation, was about as rare as sand in a desert. "Preliminary scans show we're not alone out here, aliens. Or is it just our luck to find a second apocalypse?" Voss asked, crossing his arms. He didn't bother hoping for good news. He'd left optimism behind with his last cup of decent coffee. "Not aliens exactly," Rawl said, her eyes narrowing at the screen. "It's more like echoes." "Ghost ships, great, haunted space. Just what we needed," Voss grumbled. "Are they hostile or just here to spook us?" "Unknown," Rawl replied, tapping a few buttons. "But they're definitely not from the Vareth. The signatures are all wrong. If I had to guess, I'd say they're remnants of some other poor bastards who got caught in the same cosmic blender we did. Meanwhile, Vance was adjusting his belt, trying to appear useful. Maybe they left something useful behind. Weapons, tech, or at the very least a guide on how not to die horribly, or maybe a cookbook, Voss added with a smirk. I'm sure there's a market for 101 ways to cook with vacuum. Charming, Rahl muttered, shaking her head. As they continued to scan, Voss's attention was drawn to a series of strange signals. They didn't match any known human or Vareth frequencies. They almost seemed contradictory, like they were saying two different things at once. Rahl, you seeing this? Voss asked, pointing at the screen. Yes, she said, frowning. It's weird. The signals are doubling back on themselves like they can't decide what they want to be. Finally, something out here as confused as I am, Voss said dryly. Think it's a message could be, or a trap. Or just space static with delusions of grandeur, Rahl replied. Either way, it's not in any database I've got. Wonderful. Just wonderful, Voss sighed. Let's focus on keeping the bucket afloat for now. We'll deal with the space riddles later. The fleet continued its slow, deliberate crawl through the void. Every ship bristled with a tension that was almost palpable. Every crew member, from the bridge officers to the engineers, wore the same determined but weary expressions. It was the look of people who knew they were living on borrowed time and dwindling resources. Speaking of resources, Voss said, turning to Rahl. How's our fuel holding up, still at 5%? We're running on fumes and prayers, Rahl replied, her voice tinged with frustration. Unless one of these ghost ships is hiding a gas station, we're going to need a miracle. Good thing we specialize in those, Voss said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Let's keep looking for something we can use. As they pressed on, a ripple of activity swept through the fleet. Reports trickled in of strange happenings, systems flickering to life without a clear cause, unexplained power surges, and odd structural changes. It was as if the ships themselves were reacting to the strange signals. Voss's mind flickered with possibilities, most of them bad. He knew the Vareth were relentless, but this was something different. Something adaptive. Rahl, get me everything we know about the Vareth tech, Voss ordered. I've got a feeling we're about to learn a whole lot more about our uninvited guests. Copy that, Rahl replied, her fingers dancing over the console. The Vareth were known for their advanced genetic engineering, able to adapt and evolve rapidly to counter any threat. It was what made them such a nightmare to deal with. They were always one step ahead, always changing, always improving. What if they're adapting to us in real time? Voss mused aloud. Like they're learning from our every move. Great, so we're teaching the universe how to properly screw us over, Vance chimed in, his tone heavy with sarcasm. Can't wait for the graduation ceremony. Let's hope they're not quick learners, Rahl said, though her eyes betrayed her concern. As they continued to monitor the signals, something strange began to happen. The Vareth ships that had been closing in seemed to hesitate, falter in their approach. It was as if they'd hit an invisible wall, an unseen barrier holding them at bay. Commander, the Vareth there. Slowing down, Rahl reported, disbelief in her voice. Well, that's a first, Voss said, peering at the readings. Not that I'm complaining, but what the hell could it be, these signals? Maybe they're affecting them. Rahl suggested, though she sounded as if she hardly believed it herself. Wouldn't that be something? Voss said. A hint of curiosity sparkled in his eyes. Maybe we've stumbled onto something they can't handle, or maybe they're just regrouping for a bigger assault, Vance added pessimistically. Always the optimist, Voss retorted. But hey, if these paradoxical signals are screwing with them, maybe it's something we can use. Rahl, see if you can figure out how these signals are working. If they're causing headaches for our uninvited friends, I want to know why. As they delved into the enigma, Voss felt a flicker of hope. Not much, just a spark like a single match in a downpour. But it was something, and in their line of work, something was a hell of a lot better than nothing. Keep it tight, folks, Voss said, casting a glance over the bridge. We might just have a new trick up our sleeves. Iors ticked by as the crew worked, dissecting the signals and trying to understand their impact on the Vareth. Every so often, the proximity alarms would sing out, only to be silenced as the alien ships maintained their distance, like sharks circling a particularly prickly porcupine. "Commander, you won't believe this," Rawl called out, eyes glued to her monitor. "The signals, they're exploiting some kind of vulnerability in the Vareth. It's like a mental paradox, a logical conflict they can't process. Wait, are you saying we can beat them with a riddle?" Voss asked, incredulous. "Not exactly," Rawl said, "but it seems our inconsistent human thinking, our paradoxes, might be jamming them. They're so advanced they can't handle our irrationality. Who knew being a mess was our secret weapon?" Vance quipped. Voss leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Well, I'll be damned. Our chaos might just save us yet." The irony wasn't lost on them. Humanity, with all its imperfections and contradictions, might have stumbled onto a way to level the playing field. The Vareth, with their clinical precision and cold efficiency, had found an unexpected nemesis in the form of human unpredictability. "All right, let's see if we can't harness this," Voss said, his mind racing. "We need to figure out how to amplify these signals, make them work for us." The crew set about the task, the air buzzing with a newfound energy. It was a long shot, but it was the best shot they had. And for once, luck seemed to be favoring the underdog. As they worked, Voss couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, humanity's last hope, armed with little more than stubbornness and a penchant for the unpredictable. And somehow, against all odds, they might just have found the Vareth's Achilles heel. "Commander," Rawl said, catching his attention, "we've got a plan to amplify the signals." "It's risky, but it might just work." "Risky's our middle name," Voss replied with a nod. "Let's do it." With that, the Dauntless and her fleet prepared for their next move. They were battered, bruised, and running on fumes, but they were alive. And as long as they had breath in their bodies, they'd keep fighting, keep running, and keep flipping the universe the bird. "Here's to chaos," Voss toasted, lifting an imaginary glass. "May it be ever in our favor." As they began their next gambit, one thing was certain: the Vareth wouldn't know what hit them. And for once, humanity had the upper hand, or at the very least, a hand that wasn't quite so obviously losing. The cosmos was vast, cold, and unwelcoming, but so far it hadn't managed to snuff them out. And as long as they had anything left to lose, they'd keep defying the odds, laughing in the face of impending doom. Because if there was one thing humanity excelled at, it was refusing to go gently into that good night, especially when loud, defiant laughter was an option. The Dauntless rattled like a tin can in a hurricane, the kind of noise that made you question your life choices. The entire fleet wobbled behind it, holding on to the hope that their harebrained plan might just save their collective hides. Fleet Commander Arlen Voss stared at the control panel, his expression a cocktail of grim determination and a healthy dash of skepticism. In the command center, Lieutenant Jessa Rawl looked about as thrilled as a cat in a bath. "So, this is our master plan. Hope the signals make our problems more confused than a Vareth in a logic puzzle. Got a better idea, Rawl?" Voss snapped, voice like sandpaper. It was his particular talent to channel frustration into leadership. "Maybe we should just invite them over for tea and trauma bonding." "Only if you're serving," Rawl retorted, eyes flicking back to the pulsating screens. "I'm sure they'd find your attitude intoxicating." Meanwhile, down in the guts of the ship, human engineer Serene Locke was elbows deep in a tangled mess of wires and circuits. Sweat dripped down her face, partly from the effort and partly because she suspected the air conditioning had long gone to appliance heaven. She mumbled curses under her breath, the kind that would make grandmothers blush and sailors take notes. Locke was supposed to be working on amplifying those paradoxical signals that seemed to befuddle the Vareth. But right now, her biggest enemy wasn't an alien fleet, but a stubborn piece of machinery that refused to cooperate. "Why does everything in this damn ship feel like it was designed by a committee of sadists?" she muttered. yanking on a particularly knotted cable. Probably because it was, chimed in a nearby tech, a kid named Jax who looked like he still got carded at juice bars. You know, the same people who thought putting the nuclear reactor next to the cafeteria was a genius idea. Explains why my soup glows in the dark, Locke grumbled. All right, let's try this again, because third time's the charm, or at least that's what the optimists say. Back on the bridge, Commander Voss was dealing with a different kind of headache. A meeting of the minds was taking place, and by minds, we mean the kind that argue over the last scrap of food rather than solve existential problems. "Commander, we have a problem," announced Lieutenant Rawl in the kind of voice that suggested the understatement of the year. "Please enlighten me," Voss replied, sarcasm dripping like a leaky pipe. "Internal dissent," Rawl said, crossing her arms. "Seems some of our esteemed colleagues doubt this little gambit of yours, think we're better off hightailing it." Voss raised an eyebrow. "Dissent? In my fleet? Unheard of." "Next you'll tell me the cough is burnt." "That's just it, sir," piped up another officer, a wiry fellow named Morgan with nerves as steady as a drunk juggler. "People are scared. They think we're throwing dice with the devil and calling it strategy." "Well, they are not wrong," Voss admitted. "But it's either roll the dice or fold. And folding's not really my style." The bridge crew exchanged glances, the kind that spoke of shared anxiety and caffeine withdrawal. But the core of the group knew what was at stake, and they were nothing if not stubborn. As the engineers below toiled, Locke noticed something odd. It was a flicker at first, barely perceptible unless you had an eye for the unusual. The Vareth, usually as predictable as a tax audit, were behaving erratically. Their formations broke and reformed like a flock of birds caught in a windstorm. "Jax, you seeing this?" she called out, pointing to a display that crackled with static. "Yeah, it's like they're having a collective brain freeze," Jax confirmed, eyes wide with a mix of fascination and fear. Locke shook her head, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "Could it be our paradox signals are doing more than just confusing them? What, like causing them to second-guess their life choices?" "Something like that," Locke said, a glint of hope creeping into her voice. "Maybe this isn't just random chaos. Maybe it's leverage." Up on the bridge, oblivious to the workings below, Voss was trying to keep his own crew from mutiny, or at least from losing what was left of their sanity. "So let's say, purely hypothetically, that we managed to amplify these signals," Voss postulated, arms crossed. "What are we looking at?" Rawl shrugged, eyes still glued to her screen. "Best case, the Vareth get so tangled in paradoxes they back off. Worst case, we just piss them off more." "Sounds like every plan I've ever made," Voss muttered. Rawl glanced up, a smirk tugging at her lips. "Well, at least you're consistent, and who knows, maybe they'll implode from sheer frustration." "A man can dream," Voss replied, leaning back in his chair. "But for now, let's focus on not dying, eh?" As the tension reached a crescendo, Locke's voice crackled over the comms. "Command, we've got some interesting behavior from the Vareth. The signals they are doing something. Can't say exactly what, but it's big." "Define big," Voss said, with the air of a man who had forgotten how to hope but was happy to fake it for a while. "Big like a fat guy in a small elevator big," Locke clarified. "They're not moving like they should, almost looks like they're confused." "Let's hope they stay that way," Voss replied. "Rawl, keep an eye on them, and Locke, whatever you're doing, keep doing it." As the crew fell back into action, the ship shuddered, a not-so-gentle reminder of the precarious situation they found themselves in. Every creak and groan told tales of wear and tear, of systems pushed to their limits and beyond. But for now, those stories would have to wait. They had a plan to finish. In the engineering bay, Locke and Jax were on overtime. Circuit boards and tangled wires became their world, a chaotic symphony of lights and sounds. The gambit was risky, a precarious dance on the edge of disaster, but it was the only dance they knew right now. "Remember, if anything explodes, it was your idea, Jax," Locke said, hands moving with practiced precision. Jax grinned, though his fingers trembled slightly. "And if it doesn't?" Then we retire as heroes, or at least live to see another disaster. The comms buzzed again. Lock status, Voss asked, his voice a familiar growl. Almost there, Commander. Just a few more adjustments, Locke replied, a bead of sweat running down her neck. Good. We need this to work, Locke. No pressure. None at all, sir, Locke said dryly. As the clock ticked down, the fleet held its breath. Each heartbeat, each flicker of light felt like the drumbeat of an impending storm. They had no guarantees, no promises of safety, just a ragtag crew and a fragile hope that chaos might be their ally. With a final spark and a hiss of steam, the system flared to life. Locke stepped back, wiping her brow. Signal amplification is online. Let's hope it's enough. Back on the bridge, Voss nodded to Rawl, the signal to let it rip. All right, folks. Time to see if we can teach the universe a lesson in irony. The fleet's transmitters engaged, amplifying the bizarre signals that had thrown the Vareth into disarray. The gamble was all or nothing, a bet placed on the human capacity for confusion being more potent than alien technology. Seconds stretched into eternity as the signals pulsed outwards, wrapping around the vast void, a siren call of contradictions. The Vareth ships, once an unstoppable force, faltered in their advance, halting like a boxer suddenly unsure of the next punch. Hold steady, Voss ordered, his voice a rock in the sea of uncertainty. Let's see if they blink. And blink they did. The alien formation wavered, ships drifting out of sync, their calculated maneuvers stumbling as if caught in a mental maze. The fleet watched, breaths held, as the Vareth struggled against the chaos unleashed upon them. Rawl let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. They're pulling back, Commander. Then we don't waste the opportunity, Voss replied, eyes fierce. Rawl, plot us a course out of here, and make it fast. Already on it, Rawl said, fingers flying over the console. The refugee fleet, battered and limping but alive, began to retreat, riding the wave of confusion that had momentarily halted their pursuers. Behind them, the Vareth scrambled to regain control, their efficiency turned against them in a twist of fate. As the ship sped away, Voss allowed himself a smile, small and fleeting but real. They weren't out of the woods yet, not by a long shot. But they'd bought themselves time, and in this universe, time was the most precious commodity of all. Well, I'll be damned, Voss murmured, watching the stars streak by. Looks like chaos really is our mistress. Rawl snorted, leaning back in her chair. Just another day in paradise, Commander. Yeah, Voss agreed. And let's hope tomorrow's a little less exciting. As the Dauntless and her fleet slipped into the black, they left behind a trail of reluctant admiration and begrudging respect. They may not have had all the answers, but they'd found one that mattered. In a universe hell-bent on order, sometimes it's the chaos that keeps you alive. The Dauntless had seen better days, though by better we mean slightly less catastrophic. The ship groaned under the pressure of another Vareth attack, lights flickering like a dying neon sign in a rundown bar. Arlen Voss stood in the chaos of the bridge, trying to look like a man in control, but fooling no one, least of all himself. Well, shit, Voss said, eyeing the tactical screen where the Vareth ships swarmed like a hive of angry bees. Looks like they're done playing the confused and helpless game. Yeah, Commander, they're back to playing let's annihilate everything, Lieutenant Jessa Rawl chimed in, her usual sarcasm dialed up to 11. And we're the star attraction. Voss rubbed his temples, feeling a headache brewing that could crush a planet. All right, let's keep it together. Suggestions, people. Morgan, the jittery officer whose nerves seemed to have been dipped in electricity, piped up. Well, we could always surrender. I hear the Vareth have an excellent prison hospitality program. All the radioactive sludge you can eat. Tempting offer, Voss shot back, his tone dry as the vacuum outside. But I'd rather not die of indigestion. Rawl leaned over her console, eyes narrowed at the screen like it owed her money. We're low on options and lower on fuel. We need a miracle, or at least a distraction. Voss nodded, as if miracles were something he could pull out of his back pocket. All right, Rawl, Morgan, get everyone ready. If we're making a last stand, Let's at least pretend we know what we're doing. Down in the bowels of the ship, where shadows lurked and the air conditioning was more decorative than functional, Serene Locke was elbow-deep in machinery. Sweat trickled down her forehead like a leaky faucet, pooling into her already grimy jumpsuit. "Jax, pass me the flux capacitor." "No, wait, the other thing that looks like a flux capacitor," she called out, wrestling with a stubborn piece of tech that had all the cooperation of a cat in a bathtub. Jax, ever the eager helper despite looking like he just wandered in from a high school science fair, handed over a tool with a nod. "You really think this plan's gonna work, Serene?" Locke snorted, a sound of grim amusement. "Work? Hell if I know, but it's not like we've got a lot of options, unless you fancy joining the Vareth for some interstellar tea and chat." "Pass," Jax said, grinning despite the sweat and fear. "I hear they don't even serve cookies." Locke shook her head, tightening a bolt with more force than was strictly necessary. "All right, listen up. We've got to exploit these aliens' brain freeze. If we can amplify the paradox signals, it might just screw their systems long enough for us to slip away, or at least not die in the next 10 minutes. "Great," Jax said, trying to match her bravado. "So we're betting on them being dumber than they look." Locke grinned, though it was more a baring of teeth. "Well, they couldn't be much smarter than us, right? Let's just hope they have no idea what's coming for them." Back on the bridge, the Vareth had decided subtlety was for cowards, launching a barrage that rocked the ship harder than a punch from a heavyweight. Voss clung to his chair, teeth gritted against the rising tide of panic. "Report," he barked, trying to channel authority and ending up somewhere around mildly irritated school principal. "Shields are down to 20%, Morgan said, his hands dancing over his console like he was playing a particularly deadly piano piece. "Hull integrity's holding for now, but we're one bad hit away from space confetti." "Charming," Voss muttered, eyeing the sensor readouts. The Vareth ships were closing fast, their intent to make humans extinct as clear as a flashing neon sign. Rahl looked up, her expression a mix of resignation and determination. "Got any bright ideas, Commander?" "Just one," Voss said, standing up and straightening his uniform with all the dignity of a man about to jump into a pit of snakes. "We give Locke and her team a shot. Whatever the hell they are cooking up down there. And if it doesn't work," Rahl asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then we're toast," Voss replied, a grim smile tugging at his lips, burnt to a crisp with a side of irony. "Never was a fan of toast," Rahl replied, adjusting the controls with a deftness that belied her steady nerves. Voss hit the comms. "Locke, what's your status?" "Precarious," came the reply, laced with a humor so dark it might as well have been midnight. "We're about ready to deploy the signal booster. Just say the word." "Consider it said. Make it count." Locke cut the line, focusing her attention back on the infernal machine that was their last shot. "All right, Jax, flip that switch. It's time to see if we can teach the Vareth the meaning of a bad day." Jax complied, the switch clicking with an ominous finality. The device hummed to life, a Frankenstein's monster of circuits and cables cobbled together with hope and desperation. The paradox signals, twisted and amplified, began to pulse outwards, a digital howl that sliced through the void. The Vareth felt it. Their ship stumbled, formations breaking as if caught in a spider's web. The precision of their movements dissolved into chaos, ships colliding with each other in a ballet of confusion. "Looks like it's working," Jax said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Don't jinx it, kid," Locke replied, though her heart echoed his disbelief. On the bridge, Voss watched the tactical display with eyes that betrayed a flicker of hope. "They're breaking off," he said, voice low and filled with a cautious optimism. "Looks like Locke's little science project is doing the trick." Rahl let out a breath, her shoulders relaxing minutely. "Guess they couldn't handle a little cognitive dissonance. Maybe next time they'll think twice before underestimating the human capacity for chaos," Voss replied, a smirk playing on his lips. "Assuming there's a next time," Rahl added, though the edge in her voice had dulled. The fleet, battered but not broken, seized the chance. Engines roared to life and the ship surged forward, breaking free from the Vareth trap with a collective sigh of relief. "Get us out of here, Rawl," Voss ordered, his focus shifting to the stars ahead. "Let's see if we can find a quiet corner of the galaxy to lick our wounds." "Working on it," Rawl said, her fingers a blur over the console as she plotted their escape route. Locke's voice crackled over the comms once more. "Commander, we'll need to do some serious patchwork when we get a chance. This baby's held together with spit and prayers." "Add it to the list," Voss replied, though there was gratitude in his tone. "Good work, Locke. You might have just bought us another day." As the fleet slipped into the black, the Vareth floundered in disarray, their technological superiority undone by a gamble as audacious as it was reckless. Voss sat back, the weight of survival pressing heavy on his shoulders, but lighter than it had been minutes ago. "Hey, if you told me a week ago we'd be beating aliens with a glorified logic puzzle, I'd have laughed in your face," Morgan said, shaking his head in disbelief. "Shows what you know," Rawl shot back, never missing a beat. "Humans thrive on confusion. It's our natural state." Voss chuckled, the sound rough like gravel but genuine. "Let's hope the universe doesn't catch on anytime soon. For now, let's just focus on not dying before breakfast." As the ship drifted away from the threat, the crew allowed themselves a moment of relief, a brief respite in a universe that offered few. They weren't heroes, not by a long shot, just survivors, clinging to life with stubborn tenacity and a dash of dark humor. Voss gazed out at the stars, feeling their impassive light wash over him. They had fought, and for now they had won. The cost was high, but the price of failure had been higher. In the grand scheme of things, they were but a speck in an indifferent cosmos, but they were still here, and that was something. "All right," Voss said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Let's see what tomorrow brings. With any luck, it won't involve any more existential threats." The crew shared a wry laugh, the sound ringing through the battered ship like the echo of defiance. For now, they had earned it. And maybe, just maybe, they'd get a bit of peace before the universe decided to throw another curveball their way. The Dauntless limped through the void like a wounded beast, its hull a patchwork quilt of damage and desperation. Inside, the atmosphere was as tense as a poker game with someone else's money on the line. Voss paced the bridge, his footsteps echoing like a metronome set to impending doom. "Status report," he barked, more out of habit than hope. Morgan, nerves jangling like a can of marbles, peered at the console. "Well, sir, on a scale of 1 to total obliteration, we're sitting comfortably at about to explode." "Fantastic," Voss muttered, massaging the bridge of his nose. "And here I was worried today would be boring." Rawl, forever the voice of sarcastic reason, glanced over. "Look on the bright side, Commander. At least we're still in one piece." "Mostly. Mostly's doing a lot of heavy lifting there," Voss replied, the corner of his mouth twitching into a resigned smirk. Things weren't much better down in engineering, where Serene, Locke, and Jax were engaged in what could only be described as mechanical necromancy. The room was a chaotic symphony of alarms and the occasional shower of sparks for dramatic effect. "Locke, is there anything on this ship that isn't trying to actively kill us?" Jax asked, swiping at the sweat on his brow. It was a gesture that would have looked heroic if not for the grease smudge now adorning his face. "Not unless you count the coffee machine," Locke shot back, yanking a fistful of wires with the tender care of a surgeon removing a spleen with pliers. "But it's a close call. Their device, the last best hope against the Vareth, sputtered and fizzled in a way that was neither reassuring nor impressive. The paradox signals were supposed to be their ace in the hole, their big middle finger to the universe. Instead, they were getting the technological equivalent of a damp squib. "Is it supposed to smoke like that?" Jax asked, eyeing the device with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Not unless it's learning to vape," Locke replied, yanking the wires again for good measure. "Come on, you piece of junk, do your job." The Dauntless shuddered as another barrage hit, a grim reminder that failure wasn't just an option, it was a death sentence. On the bridge, Voss gripped the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white with strain. "Commander, shields are down to 10%, Morgan reported, his voice an octave higher than usual. "I'd say we're running out of luck, but I think luck left the building a while ago." Voss glanced out the viewport, watching the Vareth ships swarm like sharks scenting blood in the water. "Then it's time we find a new way to cheat death." "Suggestions? Well, if we had any, I'd have mentioned them before we hit the panic button," Rahl said, her fingers dancing over the controls with the grace of a pianist at a particularly morbid recital. "That's the spirit," Voss replied, his tone laced with gallows humor. "If we're going down, we might as well do it with style." In engineering, Locke growled in frustration, her patience thinner than the ship's remaining armor. "All right, plan B. We improvise." "Isn't that what we've been doing all along?" Jax asked, glancing nervously at the device, now emitting a series of increasingly ominous beeps. "Improvisation is just another word for working miracle down here," Locke replied, her hands moving swiftly as she rerouted power and prayed to any deity that might be listening. "If we can't confuse them, maybe we can at least buy some time." On the bridge, Voss listened to her frantic work over the comms, his mind racing for options. The Vareth were relentless, but humans had a knack for survival. Sometimes that just meant outlasting the other guy's patience. Rahl shot him a look, half question, half resignation. "What's the plan, Commander?" "Survive," Voss said, the single word carrying the weight of the universe. Rahl nodded, her expression grim but determined. "Then let's show them what we're made of." The Dauntless shuddered again, and Voss gritted his teeth, feeling the ship's pain as if it were his own. Down in engineering, Locke and Jax worked frantically, the device sputtering with a defiant whine. "Almost there," Locke muttered, eyes narrowing as she connected the final circuit. "All right, Jax, time to see if this thing's got any guts." Jax hesitated, hand hovering over the switch. "You sure about this?" "Nope," Locke replied, her grin sharp as a blade. "But it's not like we've got better options." "Do it." The switch flipped and the device surged to life, broadcasting chaos into the void. It wasn't elegant and it wasn't pretty, but it was human ingenuity at its finest, desperation wrapped in duct tape and prayer. On the bridge, the crew watched as the Vareth ships wavered, their precise formations faltering. It wasn't the decisive blow they'd hoped for, but it was enough to give the fleet a fighting chance. "Looks like it's working," Morgan said, voice tight with hope. "Don't get too comfortable," Voss replied, though there was a flicker of relief in his eyes. "This is just the opening act." The fleet rallied, engines roaring as they seized the opportunity, surging forward with a collective determination that echoed through the hull. The Vareth staggered, their superiority challenged by the sheer stubbornness of their prey. "All right, let's get out of here," Voss ordered, his focus unyielding. "Plot a course for anywhere that isn't here, Rahl." "On it," Rahl said, fingers flying over the console as she charted their escape. Locke's voice crackled over the comms, weary but triumphant. "Commander, you owe me a drink when this is over." "Put it on my tab," Voss replied, grateful beyond measure. "Good work, Locke. You just bought us some breathing room." The fleet broke free from the Vareth's grip, the stars beckoning them towards relative safety. It was a small victory, but in a universe that seemed hell-bent on their destruction, any victory was worth celebrating. "Hey," Morgan said, a shaky smile on his lips. "We're still here. Take that, universe." "Don't get too cocky," Rahl admonished, though her own relief was evident. "There's still a long way to go." Voss settled back into his chair, the weight of command lessened but not gone. They'd survived for now. But survival was a temporary state in the cold, indifferent expanse of space. "All right, people," Voss said, his voice steady. "Let's see what this quiet corner of the galaxy has to offer." As the Dauntless drifted onward, the crew allowed themselves a moment of respite. They were battered and bruised, but not beaten. In the grand tale of survival, they were just another chapter, but one written with tenacity and a touch of irreverence. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, they'd take what they could get. In the vast cosmic dance, they'd managed to sidestep annihilation once more, proving that while the universe might be vast and uncaring, humanity was nothing if not stubborn. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. In the belly of the dauntless, Serene Locke wasn't so much fixing the paradox device as she was nudging it along with a combination of trial, error, and a generous helping of sheer bloody-mindedness. The thing was a nightmare, all wires and circuits that looked like they'd been designed by a committee of caffeine-addled monkeys. Still, Locke had a soft spot for it. It was, after all, the only thing between them and a rather unceremonious disintegration at the hands of the Vareth. "Jax, hand me the flux calibrator," Locke said, her voice muffled as she half buried herself in the device's guts. "I think you mean this piece of junk," Jax replied, holding up a tool that looked like it had seen better days, possibly in a junkyard. "If it works, I don't care if it was used in a medieval torture chamber," Locke shot back, snatching the tool from his hand. "Besides, what doesn't kill us makes us. Well, probably just delays the inevitable." "Cheery," Jax said, watching sparks fly. "Tell me, Locke, you always this optimistic about our survival." "Only on days ending in Y," she replied, her fingers deftly twisting wires that seemed determined to resist her every move. "Besides, the universe loves irony. Either we pull this off or we go out in a blaze of glory. Win-win." Jax chuckled, though there wasn't much humor in it. "If I'm going out in a blaze, I'd at least like some marshmallows and a campfire song." On the bridge, Voss was orchestrating their last, desperate maneuver like a conductor leading an orchestra of chaos. If they pulled this off, it'd be a miracle. And if not, well, he wouldn't have to worry about explaining it to anyone. "All right, listen up," Voss commanded, his voice slicing through the tension like a rusty scalpel. "We're going to use what we've got left. Time for a good old-fashioned bait and switch." "What, like dangling a stake in front of a pack of wolves?" Rahl asked, her tone skeptical but tinged with respect for Voss's audacity. "Exactly," Voss grinned. "Except we're the stake and we've got enough explosives to make it a highly questionable meal choice." Morgan looked up from his console, an eyebrow raised. "So we're using ourselves as bait. Think of it like a really aggressive game of tag," Voss replied. "We'll lure them in with the dauntless, and as soon as they bite, we hit them with the paradox signals. With any luck, they'll be too confused to tell their engines from their elbows." "That's bold," Rahl said. "But then again, what have we got to lose?" "Our lives, our sanity, the last dregs of coffee," Morgan rattled off, ticking the list off on his fingers. "Well, you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs," Voss replied, unwittingly deploying a cliché that might just be the epitaph for their current predicament. "Rahl, get those decoy signals ready. I want those Vareth more confused than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs." "Roger that," Rahl said, her fingers dancing over the controls with a speed born of necessity and caffeine. Back in engineering, Locke was down to the final touches. The paradox device was humming ominously, which she chose to interpret as a good sign. After all, nothing ever worked properly without making some kind of unsettling noise. "Let's see if this thing can break a few brains," she muttered, flipping a switch with all the fanfare of a condemned prisoner deciding their last meal. "If it doesn't, at least we'll have some interesting fireworks," Jax replied, crossing his fingers with theatrical flair. "To hell with fireworks, I'd settle for a functional piece of technology," Locke shot back, watching the device as if daring it to defy her expectations. On the bridge, Voss was keeping a close eye on the developing chaos outside. The Vareth ships were closing in, their movements as precise and predatory as ever. Soon, they'd be within range for the signals to do their work. If the device did its job, they'd have a window of opportunity as the Vareth dealt with a technological migraine of epic proportions. "Here they come," Rahl said, her voice tight with anticipation. "All right, folks," Voss said, leaning forward in his chair. "Let's show these bastards what it means to be human." As the Vareth ships closed in, the paradox device roared to life with a sound that was somewhere between a death rattle and a victory cry. The signals blasted out into the void, a cacophony of nonsense designed to scramble the enemy's systems and make them question the very fabric of reality, or at least their tactical choices. The Vareth formations began to falter, their once impeccable lines now a jumbled mess of confusion. Ships collided, spun out of control, and generally behaved like a pack of drunken space tourists on their first zero-G experience. "It's working," Morgan said, disbelief coloring his voice. "I'll be damned, it's actually working." "Don't count your escape pods before they launch," Voss said, though he couldn't hide the note of triumph in his tone. "Rahl, get us out of here before they recover." "Aye, Commander," Rahl said, a grin spreading across her face as she set the coordinates for anywhere that wasn't currently hosting a battle with odds resembling a particularly sadistic casino game. The Dauntless surged forward, engines straining but holding steady as they broke free from the chaos. The Vareth were left behind, their advance stalled by the sheer audacity of human ingenuity. Down in engineering, Locke let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Not bad for a piece of scrap metal and sheer desperation. "Not bad at all," Jax agreed, clapping her on the back. "I'd say you've earned a medal, but we're fresh out." "How about a slightly less stale protein bar instead?" "Deal," Locke replied, grinning despite herself. "Assuming we live long enough to eat it." On the bridge, the mood was cautiously optimistic. They'd pulled off the impossible, though nobody was ready to start planning a parade just yet. "All right, people," Voss said, leaning back and letting out a slow breath. "We've got some breathing room. Let's not waste it." The Dauntless navigated through the stars, their course set for a quieter sector of space. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. They'd bought themselves time, and in a universe that seemed hell-bent on grinding them to dust, that was worth its weight in gold. "Who knew the best way to win was by losing our minds a little," Rahl mused, shaking her head with a mixture of disbelief and pride. "Welcome to humanity," Voss replied, "where insanity is just another tool in the toolbox." The crew shared a laugh, the sound echoing through the ship like a defiant declaration of life. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they'd shown the universe that humanity wasn't going down without a fight. As the Dauntless sailed on, the Paradox device continued its work, a testament to the power of unconventional thinking in a universe that thrived on predictability. "Think they'll be back?" Morgan asked, casting a wary glance at the stars. Voss shrugged. "Probably, but we'll be ready for them. After all, we've got the one thing they don't." "And what's that?" Rahl inquired, her curiosity piqued. "A sense of humor," Voss replied, his grin as sharp as ever, "and a stubborn streak a mile wide." The stars stretched out before them, a tapestry of possibilities in a universe that was anything but friendly. But for now, the crew of the Dauntless would take their victories where they could find them, humor and all. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. But in the grand scheme of things, they'd proven that humanity was more than just another species in the cosmic game. They were survivors, jokers, and more importantly, a force to be reckoned with. The universe might throw another curveball their way, and the Vareth might regroup and come at them with renewed vengeance. But until then, the crew of the Dauntless would keep laughing, keep defying, and keep fighting. Wounded, weary, but never defeated. As far as legacies went, it was as good as any. The Dauntless hurtled through the stars, a defiant middle finger aimed at the universe and everything in it. On the bridge, Voss grinned like a wolf that had just outrun the hunters. "All right, let's get some distance before the Vareth decide they'd rather not have their brains scrambled like a bad breakfast special." Rahl nodded, fingers flying over her console. "Coordinates set. We're heading for the galaxy corner, a place so dull even the universe forgot it existed." "Perfect," Voss replied. "With any luck, the Vareth will be too busy untangling their circuits to notice we're gone." Morgan leaned back, still eyeing the stars with suspicion. "Think this'll buy us more than a few minutes of peace?" "Probably not," Voss admitted. "But it's the best shot we've got. Besides, who wouldn't want a front row seat to the greatest train wreck in the galaxy?" said the train conductor, Rahl quipped, her voice laced with sarcasm. Down in engineering, Locke was basking in the glow of temporary success. "Well, that worked better than expected," she said, slapping the side of the Paradox device with something akin to affection. It's like watching a toddler trying to walk for the first time, unsteady, hilarious, and a little bit tragic. Don't get too cozy, Jax warned, squinting at a panel that was flickering like a nightclub strobe light. This baby's not gonna hold forever, but damn, it's fun while it lasts. Fun? I didn't know you were such an optimist, Locke shot back. Call it gallows humor. We're all just puppets in a cosmic farce, might as well laugh before the strings snap. Back on the bridge, the crew was settling into a rhythm of cautious efficiency, each movement a testament to the human penchant for functioning under duress. Voss glanced at Rahl, who was monitoring the decoy signals. How are we looking? Like a pack of wolves that just found out they were chasing their own tails, Rahl replied. The Vareth are all over the place. Their formations have gone from tight to non-existent. Good, Voss said, satisfaction dripping from his voice. Let's keep them chasing shadows while we make our getaway, Morgan smirked, his usual anxiety momentarily forgotten. You know, Commander, if this fleet commander gig doesn't work out, you've got a real future in orchestrating elaborate deceptions. I'll keep that in mind for my next career change, Voss replied dryly, keeping one eye on the navigation screen. The Paradox device was doing its job, sending signals that twisted and bent the Vareth's senses like a funhouse mirror. Chaos reigned in the alien ranks. Their genetic programming was unraveling like a cheap sweater in a hurricane. Back in engineering, Locke and Jax were keeping the device humming, their eyes bleary from exhaustion but their spirits oddly buoyant. Think the universe will give us a break after this? Jax asked, more out of habit than hope. The universe doesn't do breaks, Locke replied, adjusting a stubborn wire with the precision of a heart surgeon. But it might give us a breather if we're lucky, and if we're not, then at least we'll go down swinging, which is more than most can say. On the bridge, the tension was palpable but laced with a thread of triumphant vindication. They'd pulled off the impossible, and for the moment, things seemed a little less bleak. Rahl's eyes were fixed on the controls, her concentration unerring. Any chance our Vareth friends will just give up and go home? Morgan asked, his tone half joking, half hopeful. Not a snowball's chance in hell, Voss replied. But turmoil makes for great cover. As long as they're busy trying to figure out which way is up, we have the element of surprise. Rahl chuckled, glancing at Voss. Who knew surprise would be our most valuable weapon? Maybe we should start selling tickets. First, let's make sure we survive to see the sequel, Voss said, his expression serious but his eyes twinkling with a dark kind of humor. Rahl, when do we hit the galaxy corner? About 5 more minutes. Enough time to catch our breath and maybe even patch up some of the chaos we've left in our wake. Voss nodded, turning his attention back to the navigation console. All right, people, let's keep it together. We've got a narrow window to slip through, and I'd rather not spend it picking Vareth out of my teeth. The crew worked with a precision that belied their ragtag appearance, each member contributing to the whole with a kind of grim determination that could only be honed by desperation and experience. In engineering, Locke wiped her brow with the back of her hand, sweat mingling with grease in a testament to hard-won victories. This thing's holding up better than I thought, she said, her voice almost reverential. Well, it's a junk heap with a heart of gold, Jax replied, patting the device as though it were a beloved pet. Let's hope it keeps chugging along. Hope's all we've got left, Jax. But it'll have to do. As the Dauntless moved into the galaxy corner, the stars seemed to settle into a quieter pattern, a vast expanse of muted colors and distant twinkles that spoke of solitude and silence. The fleet slipped into the shadows, ghosts in the night, leaving behind the chaos and clamor of their recent engagement. Looks like we've made it, Rahl said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. We've outrun them for now. Voss allowed himself a rare smile, the kind that carried the weight of countless battles and the hope of more to come. Let's not get too comfortable. The Vareth aren't known for their short attention spans. Morgan let out a low whistle, shaking his head in wonder. You know, I never thought we'd actually pull it off. Maybe there's something to this whole human spirit thing after all. Don't get too sentimental, Voss warned, though his voice was teasing rather than harsh. We've still got a long way to go. The crew took a moment to bask in their improbable success, each one relishing the knowledge that they'd managed to hoodwink a vastly superior force, if only for a short while. It was a victory, small and fleeting, but a victory nonetheless. In engineering, Locke and Jax exchanged a weary yet satisfied glance. "Think we'll get a chance to do this again?" Jax asked, half joking. "Oh, I'm sure the universe has plenty more curveballs up its sleeve," Locke replied, her tone somewhere between fatalistic and amused. "But for now, let's just enjoy the fact that we're still here to fight another day." Back on the bridge, Voss surveyed his crew, his expression a blend of pride and resolve. "All right, everyone, we've bought ourselves some time. Let's make the most of it and get this ship back in fighting shape." Rahl gave him a nod, her eyes bright with determination. "We'll get it done, Commander. Just point us in the right direction." Voss leaned back in his chair, allowing himself a moment of quiet reflection amidst the chaos. The Vareth would be back, no doubt about it. But until then, they'd keep pushing forward, driven by the sheer bloody-mindedness that only humanity could muster. "All right, crew," Voss said, his voice carrying the weight of command and the resolute optimism that had brought them this far. "Let's get to work. We've got a universe to confound." The Dauntless continued its journey through the stars, a testament not to the perfection of its technology or the infallibility of its crew, but to the unyielding spirit of those who refused to be cowed by the odds. They were battered, bruised, and running on fumes, but they were still standing, still fighting, and still laughing in the face of inevitable doom. As the stars slipped by outside, the crew of the Dauntless prepared for whatever came next, their eyes fixed on the horizon and their hearts steeled against the challenges yet to come. Together, they'd face the fury of the universe with defiant humor and an unwavering resolve. After all, they were only human, and that was more than enough. The aftermath of a battle always feels like the morning after a particularly raucous party. Everyone's a little worse for wear, the place is a mess, and someone's always missing a shoe. For the crew of the Dauntless, the stakes were a bit higher than just a hangover and misplaced footwear, but the sentiment was the same. The refugee fleet had narrowly dodged the Vareth's relentless pursuit, but at what cost? Voss rubbed his temples, trying to ward off a headache that was threatening to split his skull like a ripe melon. "All right, people, let's take stock. What's left of our fleet? What's broken beyond repair, and who's still got a working liver?" Rahl glanced up from her console with a smirk. "The liver's on the endangered list, but it's still going strong, Commander. As for the fleet, we've lost 2 ships, Orion's Folly and the Starstruck. They bought the farm. Guess they always wanted to own land," Voss muttered, though his heart wasn't quite in the joke. Losing ships meant losing people, and that was a bitter pill to swallow, even for a man with his appetite for cynicism. Morgan leaned against the wall, his usual suspicion giving way to a rare moment of introspection. "It's not all bad news. The Vareth are chasing their tails, and we've got some breathing room. For now." "Breathing room," Voss echoed, letting the words roll around his tongue like a sip of bad coffee. "Last time I checked, we weren't running a yoga retreat. We need more than breathing space, we need a miracle." Down in engineering, Locke and Jax were still wrestling with the paradox device. Locke looked at Jax, a smudge of grease on her cheek like war paint. "Think we'll get a commendation for saving the day, or just another pile of work?" Jax grinned, the kind of grin that suggested he'd gladly take the latter over the former. "Knowing our luck, they'll probably give us a medal made of stress fractures and broken promises." "Fitting," Locke replied, adjusting the flux calibrator with the care usually reserved for disarming bombs. "But anyway, this baby's still holding together, which is more than I can say for most relationships." Back on the bridge, Rahl was busy plotting a new course, her fingers dancing over the controls with the grace of a concert pianist on speed. "I've charted a path to an unoccupied sector, the Void's edge. Sounds cozy, right?" Just don't expect room service. Voss allowed himself a dry chuckle. Cozy's just another word for bored out of your mind, but I'll take it over getting vaporized any day. Morgan nodded in agreement. I'd rather be bored than be a Vareth's chew toy. What's the plan, Commander? The plan, Voss replied, with the air of someone who'd thought about this quite a lot, is to keep doing what we do best. Survive. Keep the Vareth confused, keep us alive, and maybe, just maybe, figure out how to turn this mess to our advantage. Rahl raised an eyebrow, looking more amused than incredulous. So basically, another day in paradise. Exactly, Voss said, with a grin that suggested he was relishing the thought of another round with the universe's worst houseguests. Now let's get this ship patched up. We've got a date with Destiny, and I'd rather not show up looking like we just rolled out of a scrapyard. As the crew dispersed to their various tasks,